Well, welcome. Before we jump in, could you share a little bit about yourself, both personally and professionally, so our listeners can know a little bit more about you, Priscilla?
Sure. So I am the youngest of three women. So
All
I was born and
right.
raised in Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean. And our parents really loved the idea of us learning and traveling. And so they went to school overseas. So I had to go to school overseas. And I was fortunate to choose Drexel in Philadelphia,
Okay.
great engineering program, as well as co-op. And I really wanted to do the co-op because I wanted to understand if engineering was for me and also get paid at the same time.
Nice. Yes.
Ironically, I changed my major after my first co-op because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so I changed from materials to chemical engineering. But I
Right.
graduated with chemical engineering degree, and I started a 2-year rotational program at Stanley Black& and Decker and had 4 rotations, one in purchasing, one in engineering, and then two in manufacturing, one in Jackson, Tennessee, and then one along the Texas Mexico border area. So I was really able to use the Spanish I had learned at school in high school, and I was able to teach a or facilitate a DMAIC class in Spanish. So that was really cool. I really
That is
enjoyed that.
so
Wow.
cool.
So really great,
I don't
great
think I could have
people.
taught anything technical with my high school French. Like, no.
Actually find the technical pieces of trying to do that in a different language is even harder. Like I
Hmm.
can do the conversational, where's the bathroom? How are you? I'd like something to eat. That's
That's
Yeah.
impressive.
impressive.
I used it in quite a few different scenarios. There are some other incidences, but here. So after I graduated from the program, I stayed around the Texas, Mexico area, and I was a supplier quality engineer. And after that role, I moved on to category management, relationship management, working with suppliers much more closely, but new products engineering. So learning more about what kinds of categories Stanley Black& and Decker purchases, going to our factories in the US as well as in Asia, and going to supplier factories and understanding more about their manufacturing processes and just more about them in general. And as I got into category and relationship management, I did some risk mitigation, which prepared me for a supplier who was going bankrupt, and it was a
Mm.
completely tragic scenario, air shipping products for several months. And
Wow.
I wanted to help others. So when there was an opportunity in a newly formed risk management team, I joined. And I officially joined maybe maybe 1 week, sorry, before there was the COVID shutdown in 2020. So that was extremely interesting because, you know, we're building a program and like want to kind of do it nice and smooth and slow. And then it's like, but
Yeah.
you guys have to do like
Now.
everything, a whole bunch of things at one point in time. So a really great experience, really great learning opportunity, and quite different from category management because there had like fixed goals and targets, what I would consider like in a box. And now it's kind of like, okay, processes and trying to develop the processes within the team. And I was promoted to lead the team a few years ago, and we added on. So we started with financial and operational, and now we do financial, operational, regulatory, and reputational risks.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So Priscilla, through all this, like when was the moment you realized like this is the career for me or this like I'm in a good space? Like was it like kind of what career transition or did you once you got to chemical engineering, like how did you know like the supply
Sure.
chain area was for you?
So my first rotation in purchasing, I really liked it, trying to understand more about the materials that we were purchasing, like plastics and the factories which they were going to. But then when I was supplier quality engineer in Renosa, it felt like the mail, like the problems just kept on coming. And there would be situations where because we were receiving product from all over the world, you could have weeks of poor quality product on the water, months, and
Mm.
it was just like a lot at points in time. And I really just wanted to work with suppliers and be like, hey, like this is wasteful. This is like, I mean, when you have line downs in manufacturing, I think you both know that's really not a desirable situation. So it's like, how can you prevent that? And I really wanted to work with suppliers from that. So I did an APIC certification, And when I found out a little bit more about ISM, I did the certified professional in supply management. I liked the procurement aspect a little bit better. And from there, just started to move forward in supply chain and procurement.
So how would you describe to your family or you meet someone at a dinner party? Like, what do you do? Like, what is your job?
I would say that I look for weaknesses or vulnerabilities in suppliers if they're going bankrupt, and we try to build the processes and the systems and the tools which our stakeholders can use to be able to make the organization more resilient. So we will definitely try to prevent and predict every single risk, but it's super impossible. So we want to make sure that they're armed with everything that they need to minimize and mitigate the risks.
Nice. Okay, so
Thank
that kind
you.
of leads in to my next question. The role that you're in right now has a lot to do with business resiliency, right? Like it's key to your role. What does it mean to actually build resilience through proactive risk management? Like what are some fundamental practices that maybe we like other people or companies could consider for implementing this?
So business resiliency means that you are scenario planning for when imperfect happens.
Hmm.
And I think you all have heard a term in the past 5 years more often than other, VUCA. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that represents the entire risk environment. And so you could be planning for so many different risks, but you need to really focus on those kinds of risks which are more relevant to your organization, being able to identify those, as well as some of the black swan ones. So COVID being like, all encompassing, doesn't happen super often, but it can be pretty impactful to your business. So you can plan for that, but more likely you're going to be planning for those more close ones. So you definitely identify what those are, and you try to work alongside multiple teams to understand what they mean for your organization and minimize that impact. You need to plan throughout the source to pay process. So looking at new supplier onboarding, which is probably the only place where you can actually prevent and predict risks,
Mm.
because you have a supplier who isn't tied to any revenue within your business. And so you can say, hey, I don't think that you're the right supplier for our organization. It would be great if you came in with whatever you have, but you have a high financial risk and you're going to put us at greater risk if we bring you in. You could determine that you want to accept those particular risks, but with the caveat that, a few things have to happen if you are going to accept that risk, but at least going into it what those risks are and you can mitigate them ahead of time. You also need to be doing a lot of supplier monitoring. So even if you've checked the supplier at the beginning of the relationship, you need to understand how often you need to continue checking them and for what particular risks. It's really important that the supplier management aspect comes in too, because the supplier needs to be involved in that risk management process. If it's all on your organization, it really won't go anywhere, because the supplier needs to be planning for their own risks. So you
Yeah.
need to talk with them about what kinds of risks that you're seeing and asking them, are you planning for them? Do you have business continuity plans? What are you preparing for? And making sure that they also value risk management as much as you do.
I was like, that's a good reminder because sometimes I struggle with how far down the value chain can you protect for and how much is because it's like you can say it's not your accountability, but if they don't have it and they haven't done it, so how, you think about some of the smaller suppliers, how do you think about that, like with risk management and they're just their own resources and ability and technology challenges? So how do you give them more leeway because they just don't have some of the more advanced systems, especially if it's a niche supplier that you need? Like, how do you think about that?
Sure, I think you need to meet them where they are, right? Like you can't expect them, to your point, to really come up to a completely different level where they're outpaced. So for example, we were talking earlier this week about smaller suppliers doing social accountability audits and paying for them. And in this case, we don't receive a lot of product from this particular supplier. So for them to do a full-blown audit, it really may not be beneficial. So what we would do is understand, okay, based on your business, you can do this kind of assessment. But I think you really need to listen to the supplier and understand And then you need to determine if you should move that business away, because you're talking about niche technology and your spend with that supplier could be small, but the ultimate value to the organization could be significant.
Right.
So you have those suppliers who you might buy dollars, a lot of money, but in comparison to a $10 million supplier, you're like, I won't do it. It doesn't matter. But if their products go into every single come manufactured assembly that you produce, you're in really big trouble. So you probably need to balance, like, should I continue to have a relationship with this supplier, or should I try to mitigate that risk with a bigger supplier? I have more business, and we can have a better opportunity to do what I want them to do there.
All right. So you did talk about this, about mitigating risk. So we identify the risk, but how do you approach developing kind of formal playbooks to mitigate the risk? And can you share a example of a supply chain risk or strategy from one of your playbooks?
Sure. So I think it's really important to have scenario plans about what if, but they have to be agile plans, because, like we know within supply chain, you could have two suppliers who are in similar situations, but they're just slightly different nuances, which mean that you can't copy and paste the same formula on both of them. And if you try to, it's going to be so difficult to try to maneuver the situation. It really won't make any sense. So you have to have agile plans. You have to have clear roles and responsibilities, because anytime something happens, everybody's looking around. So who does what? And so setting out those roles and responsibilities alongside the activities is really critical. I think you also need to be willing to change those activities if they're not working. So understanding, did these actually help, or do we need to revamp those particular playbooks? And just cascading them with multiple stakeholders.
So as you build these, do you build these with the supplier? Like I imagine like you look at these are the potential risks. It could be weather, it could be financials, all these different things. And so when you do these playbooks and these scenarios, do you do it with the supplier? That's my first question. And then another one is like, do you ever do, I've heard them called like tabletop exercises where you actually kind of practice a fake emergency and then work through the playbooks to see like, did we catch everything? Was there something here that was missing?
Sure. So we do invite the supplier into the process, because there's
Okay.
sometimes that we do need to ask them questions. And I do realize I missed I'm telling you about a common risk scenario, but it is important for us to test some of those to see, okay, at the end of the day, are we thinking what would actually be effective is effective? So to your point, several stakeholders have to participate in the
Uh,
process. You'll always have that particular supplier who is, oh, I'm not going to provide you with financial information. So then what will you provide us with, right? We can have like a silent audit so that we can understand what's going on in your factory, but please, providing nothing isn't really an option. And so one of the more common supply chain risks, I would say, is like that niche supplier that you talked about earlier, and being single or sole sourced. And for clarity, when I'm talking about single sourcing being that you may have a commodity product and you can choose multiple suppliers, but for whatever reason you determine, hey, I really need this one supplier for competitiveness, lead time, and you're just going to choose that supplier. You have several different options, but no, I'm just going to stick with this one, versus the sole source technology you can't buy from anybody else. So you're going to need to determine if that makes sense down the road, as opposed to, hey, this is what the business wants right now. We just want to deal with one supplier and we're just going to buy that IP from them. And that makes sense for us, because when you're down the road and that supplier could be struggling, or you have a change in technology and that supplier is highly dependent on you, it could mean disaster for both of you. So
yeah.
it's important to plan short and long term how you're going to manage that. Is it with extra inventory or dual sourcing? And dual sourcing can be expensive. So you really need to understand what levers you can pull to make it a success.
I was gonna say, I think sometimes it's easy for people to say, just dual source. And it's like, yeah, but it's expensive. You got to manage
Mhm.
that. So yeah, definitely is not a one size fit all.
Okay, so as this I thought was really cool as we were looking at some of the really great things you've done in your background and at um Black& Decker, you've actually won this award, but specifically it was focused on um, ESG programs for procurement. Could you share a little bit about the framework that you developed and how like linking this in with ESG is just, I think, really crucial for modern supply chains?
Sure. So within the last 2 years, we've taken on environmental sustainability and social accountability, and it's been a lift. There are things that I'm learning about that I didn't know before, but I think that's something that's pretty great about supply chain. You're always learning. And I'll focus on the social accountability because that was something that was within another team, and they had the bodies to go out and do the supplier auditing. And when it transitioned to ours, it was like 3 people. So then I was like, okay, we're going to turn this into an outsourced program. So we looked at all the materials which they shared with the suppliers. And then we started to look at external standards. United Nations International Labor Organization, their tenets say 8,000, which is a standard for decent work conditions. And we decided, okay, there are probably 8 to 10 pillars that we want suppliers to check on a regular basis. So then we took these 8 pillars and matched them up with several different auditing standards that suppliers could use. And there were some that were more common than others, but then we settled on 5. So it's basically trying to determine, hey, how can we standardize things so that as we roll this out to the suppliers, it's not super confusing. It's very well set out. We also wanted to share with them, this is what will happen if you don't score well. It doesn't automatically mean that we stop business. We need to understand how you're going to work through a problem. So the worse you score, the more often you have to do the auditing, and just sharing that very clear guideline with the suppliers. I believe that ESG at this point in time is being set up to generate more transparency within our supplier networks than there was before. I mean, you have the United States Customs Border Patrol, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the UK Modern Slavery Act, the Canadian Supply Chain Act, all designed to prevent supply chains being based on forced labor. Then you've got laws on PFAS to understand, hey, what are those intentionally added or unintentionally added chemicals to our products that could harm your immune system or anything else. So I feel that a lot of the legislation right now is trying to require manufacturers to open up their networks so that people know more about what's going on before they purchase or as they purchase.
It is such a complicated kind of web, right? It's all these different laws and regulations across different countries. It's also just navigating and making sure you have somebody, I think, locally who can really also like make sure they align with your company values as well. Uh,
Exactly.
that is a really cool, like, I love that you've developed a framework to help your company like standardize that as you go out and do those things.
Yeah, I mean it's not easy per se because
Yeah.
you do need to, it may be things that you've done before, but you're doing them at a different level, you're doing them at a different pace because mentioned it used to be an in-source program. So now that it's outsourced, there's slightly different rules. And we definitely try to bring team members along on that journey to let them know how important it is. And it's a reputational risk for the organization, for
Yes,
anyone, right?
absolutely.
So at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do.
Priscilla, so as head of supplier risk management, you project manage the implementation of supply chain risk monitoring software. And for all of us who've done any software technology upgrades, we know it can be very challenging. So can you share some of your biggest challenges during the implementation and what advice you would offer for others to make sure that they have a successful rollout?
Sure. So when we were implementing the tool, we were also starting our program and our processes. So we had a lot going on. So we were able to do it, but it was really a push. And I think that anybody implementing software needs to realize it will not solve problems. Software is supposed to be an enabler. It's not supposed to be a problem solver. So if you have gaps in your process, it will not fix that. It may actually amplify them because you're not really able to leverage the software to its best ability. I think you need to talk with other customers where possible, or people within your network, to figure out how do they leverage their own software, right? Even if it isn't the same organization that you're looking at, the same software that you're looking at, try to get their opinion, because often when you're implementing, even if you had specific things called out in your RFP, there will undoubtedly be a time when you look at the software and you're like, well, I didn't know to ask that question. It's
I think that has
awkward, but
gotten
it's
all
like,
of us before. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it would be great if you could have some kind of UAT testing beyond the demo, but it doesn't often align like that. So sometimes there are things that are just going to happen, and you need to navigate through those. I think you also need to ensure you aren't thinking that bells and whistles for that technology are the only things that you can go for, because your program might not be there and it may never need to purchase all of the bells and whistles. So if you think that you have to purchase everything top of the line and you only end up using like 1/10 of it, but you only need 1/10 of it, that's really okay. You just really need to match what you need with what the software offers. You don't need to go all out.
That is a good example. We talked about this, I think, in Leslie Marshall's episode around process, where people think you just plop a technology or a software system, but if you don't have good process or if there's capability gaps, I think what you said about magnifying the problem, I think people have seen that more often than not. Because what I have learned is, especially if the software is more sophisticated, people have their own manual workarounds, and when they can't do those, they're like, well, and I'm like, yeah, because that's not the way it's supposed to be done. That's when you discover, we call it like work is designed by how work is done, where like
Hmm.
the work is done is not even close to how we should have been doing it. So
Yeah,
I think that's a really
exactly.
good call.
I mean, at the end of the day, everybody wants to download something to Excel, right? So, like, if you
I know.
can't, it's like, oh
They
no.
do because they want to look at it a certain way. They want to play,
It
slice
doesn't
it. Yeah.
matter, yeah, like how
Yeah.
advanced. It's
Yeah.
like, can I download it to Excel, manipulate it the way?
No, it's crazy.
Okay, so another question that I wanted to ask you about was this thing called BISCO, broadcast impact for supply chain optimization. I had not heard of this before, but it focuses on areas like how do you maximize performance and standardization and have seamless partnerships. Could you just share what is
Sure.
BISCO, and how do you leverage it?
So a few years ago, I was at a crossroads in terms of what I wanted to do professionally. I didn't know if I wanted to go for a master's in risk management or an MBA, if I wanted to stay in procurement, supply chain, or go in operations. And so I worked with a career coach, and we were working through where I add value and how I add value to an organization. So it's a way for me to add value, value creation, and impact. So you're looking at making sure that you have the right team members in the right roles and at the right skill levels. I'm a collaborative leader. I have a collaborative leadership style. I definitely want to understand what team members want to do. I know that you always don't have the opportunity to do that, but to the best extent possible that you're able to align your passions with what you're doing, I think it allows you to feel engaged and empowered to act, and you act well and you overperform. So I definitely want to ensure that people are receiving what they need to be able to perform. And then we talked about standard processes, making sure that we all can have repeatable processes so that you can create value. There's nothing more frustrating when you are trying to make improvements and there's all of this stuff going on that you don't know about because the processes aren't standard. They don't have to be perfect, but at least everybody understands what everybody else is doing, what the roles and responsibilities are. And then also the idea of seamless partnerships. So we have stakeholders, and because we don't work in a silo, we need to understand what their needs are and walk hand in hand with them before we determine, hey, what I'm doing is better. And for me, it's critical to being able to add value, making sure that you're understanding what the stakeholder is doing, the standardization, and making sure that the people in the process, they are set up for success.
Thank you.
Amazing. Never heard of Bisco either. So I was like,
Well,
what is
as I said,
this?
we talked through it, and it's like it makes sense. It's what I love to do. It's making sure, as I said, that people, they're set up for success, because I feel in some cases you can be in roles and you're just doing okay, right? You're maybe
Mm.
doing that accidental growth as opposed to intentional growth. And you really want to help people get where they want to go ultimately.
And can you talk a little bit more, Priscilla, about cohesive culture and innovation decision matrix as a part of BISCO and how they
Sure.
contribute to supply chain success?
So at the end of the day, when you're working in a team, we all work in teams in some form or fashion. You want to be working towards the same goal, the same success of the organization. And I feel at points in time, team members can be fighting against that. Like what I'm doing is more important than others. So having that cohesive culture and aligning with those seamless partnerships is a practical element. And then innovative decision matrix. So I'm not sure if you all have read The Five Temptations of a CEO.
No.
Oh,
And
ooh,
it's a short book. And one
ooh.
of the quotes that stood out for me were no decision is worse than a bad decision.
Mm.
And that time where nobody wants to make a decision because they just don't. That's a really frustrating point in time, I think, for any team member. So when we're working together, we understand the fact that we have to make a decision, right? We don't have to rush towards a decision, but we all need to be willing to commit to a particular decision. And we may need to do so based on, we might not have all the perfect data, right? You can't wait for perfect data. If you did, you probably wouldn't do anything. So we're all aligned on the fact that we need to make a decision and the fact that based on the information we have, we feel that's good enough for us to move forward. So aligning around those principles I feel creates the biggest value.
Priscilla, what was that book? I'm putting it in my notes on my phone.
Five Temptations of a CEO.
I mean, it sounds kind of scandalous.
I know. I'm like, I want to, especially right
It's a
now.
really good title.
Yes, I found that was pretty powerful because I get frustrated when decisions aren't being made. And as I said, it's not the idea that, hey, decisions need to churn out, but when things need to happen and you're just waiting and you're just waiting, and
It
people like, you
is.
should just do it.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
like,
is. It's the absence of context, information. And so people can swirl, they can do a lot of work that isn't value added. Yeah, I mean, I'm
One of
reflecting now and
my
I'm like, yeah, think about people you've
friends,
worked for where no decision
yeah,
versus just
Cheryl
like
McEwen
make a
always
call.
said, like, what's the worst that could happen and can you undo it?
Mm-hmm.
I almost think we think like, oh, if I make this decision, that and you realize like I could probably undo it, and the worst isn't really that bad. But yeah, it is easy to sit in purgatory paralysis analysis. We'll just keep doing.
exactly,
We'll just,
exactly.
someone's like, I
And I
need
think
more data. I'm like, do you?
exactly. And I think people lose confidence in a leader who can't make a decision. I mean, again, yeah, you can make bad decisions. And, if you're not thinking through your decisions and going back through them, that's one thing. But then just that analysis paralysis it drives me crazy. I am a recovering analysis paralysis person.
You're
I
like,
realize the dangers of
drives
it.
me crazy. Used to be me, but that's okay.
Yeah, I realize that it's not worthwhile, right? It doesn't get you where you need to go. So
Katie and
recovering.
I are more into like, okay, go.
Go.
Like,
And everyone's like,
yes, no, yes, okay.
all right. So, kind of looking a little bit more now towards the future, right? Because you've been in the industry for over 15 years. How have you seen the supply chain professional, like career path, maybe evolve? And then, what skill sets do you think are becoming increasingly vital for like success in this field?
Sure. So I think a lot of the women that I've heard on your podcast so far, I haven't listened to all episodes, but I know that quite a few of them have come in from different areas, right?
Hmm.
From you mentioned finance, engineering, and now supply chain is its own curriculum. And
Yeah.
it was a lot different from before. I think the profession is also more respected. People realize that it's not that easy, right? Everybody before they could do it. Yeah, I can negotiate. But no, now it's more respected because it's shown to be a contributor to protecting and growing the bottom line. I think even through COVID, you understand like the relationship management that was so critical to being able to get parts when some manufacturers were shut down and when they started up. If you had good relationship management, then you were first in line to get those parts. I think stakeholder engagement, like I talked about, those seamless partnerships and just being able to deliver successfully on any given project or process or anything like that within the organization. Stakeholder engagement is pretty key, as well as change management, because a lot of things are happening very quickly, and that doesn't even count technology changes where you need to be able to incorporate technology to make things that much more productive. So you need to be willing to change, and you need to bring stakeholders along for that change. I'd also say project management, because we're typically not working on one thing at a time. Even if you're working on one project, there are multiple facets, and being able to run that successfully to lead the organization forward, I think all three of those are pretty critical.
And Priscilla, as you think about your journey in supply chain, but specifically risk management, if there's another woman that's like, hey, I want to do what Priscilla does and get to where you are, what advice would you give? Is there anything as you've learned along the way that you would advise your younger self or to new women coming into this area?
Sure, I'd say don't relegate learning to like one part of your life, and also don't put certain things in the learning box. So you're going to learn throughout your career, and it really just depends on you being open. And when I talk about putting things in one box, like everybody assumes that you can only learn through like certifications or degrees.
Mm,
Conversations like this, networking through
Mhm.
professional organizations, podcasts, there are a variety of ways for you to learn. So be open to that and be willing to pivot. Like we all have these goals where we're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. And then you see something else and you're like, I might be more passionate about that. Be willing to take that risk, because I I thought I was a lifelong relationship manager per se. And as I came over to risk management, I'm working more on processes. Like I thought before, like, gosh, like it's almost like a fuzzy cloud, right? Because processes, they're different from, hey, you need to have 5% year over year productivity. You have to have a successful process. Well, what does that mean? Breaking it down. So it required a lot more creativity. And so being willing to pivot in those areas, I think, is important. I also think being able to track your successes and just do a general tracking. It doesn't need to be every day. It could be whatever cadence you feel is best, but to make sure that you are where you think you should be. Again, you may pivot, but at the same time, keeping track of that so that you're closer to the woman you want to be than, just hanging out.
Okay, you triggered a question that I hear from people that I mentor. So when you're in a role that's like a process role, how do you really measure your success and communicate that? Because I think people feel like it's so much easier, to your point, when you can say, I delivered 10% productivity. I delivered 20% improvement on the bottom or top line. So how, when you think about areas like yours are real process heavy, like how do you measure success and in a way that leaders that don't know the details understand the value you're bringing to the org?
Sure. So one of the areas, for example, is like new supplier onboarding. It was a process that was set up within the organization, but it may not have been standardized. So trying to understand who does it. Again, bringing in some of those stakeholders. We were like, okay, it's just these people. All right, set it, go. And we ended up having like 2% of all suppliers, right? So it's like, okay, that's not it. Who else is involved in the process? So making sure you're bringing in the right stakeholders, right? You can't assume that it's just your limited sphere of people. You really need to explore a lot more across the organization, be willing to ask questions, be willing to partner up and collaborate with other team members, and then determine like what is a realistic parameter for us to get to. Nobody knows about this, formalized process that you need to go through our team to check suppliers. So then what do we need to do? We need to do uh, not webinars, but you need to do campaigns, and you need to make sure that, hey, these are the stakeholders who are the most frequent. So you need to understand who are the stakeholders, what are their particular roles, and how you can do that change management alongside them, and then set up realistic goals. So we knew, although we thought 100% was probably the greatest thing that we could do, no, we couldn't get there unless we started some of those things. And then we also needed to work with management on like a top down. So at points in time, it was like, well, we're also trying to get rid of suppliers. So working that together with management, it's been helpful for us to be able to set realistic standards and then achieve those goals that we've established from there.
Thank you.
Good one. Okay, so another leadership question then. This one is around oftentimes we'll hear like people will have like this aha moment when it comes to leadership. Do you have a specific story or a piece of advice maybe you got from a mentor along the years that really just shifted your perspective on how to lead others?
Sure. So it wasn't from a mentor, it was a business leader, and it was in a negative context. And we were in a team training session, and there were some things going on in the organization which were a little bit comfortable, and we were asked to share how we felt about them. And so I shared, but in a professional manner. I wasn't whining, wasn't doing any of that. The person was like, don't be a victim.
You asked for my opinion.
But like that seemed like the least helpful thing because, I was looking for a leader to lead and at least not necessarily save the day, but at the same time, like, this is a perspective that you could carry forward and not being a victim. I was like, gosh, well, like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And for me, it was about being able to listen more because it was a vulnerable moment for all of us. So it was definitely uncomfortable, but it's like, okay, as a leader, I don't always need to give advice to other people all the time, right? Like,
Mm.
okay, leader, a person in charge who is a decision maker, but you don't always need to be heard, right?
You're
Listen
basically
to
like,
other
shut up.
people. Yeah, I mean,
You're being
listen to
polite,
other
Priscilla.
people.
Yeah.
And then the way I took it, quite frankly, was that that person wasn't going to be an advocate for change, right?
Hmm.
Even in their particular role, they may not have been responsible for everything that was going on, but at the same time, they had some power to make things different in the environment. And I want to be a leader who listens, who genuinely care, and who's able to step out on a limb and make changes. If those changes go significant or if they're small, but at the same time, be willing to make a change.
Sometimes I think in those moments where you have a poor experience or a leader just doesn't make you feel great, those are really good learning moments because it's almost like I'm going to remember this and I'm going to make sure that I don't do this to like
Yeah.
my team in the future or somebody I'm coaching. Yeah, even when those moments happen, there's still like a really good perspective to gain.
Yeah. No, I mean, as I
I
said,
think,
I spiraled for a little bit, but
yeah.
I thought,
I mean,
use
we
it
all do
for,
that. We have our feels and then like the wisdom that comes out of it on the other side is like I'm going to remember this and not do this.
Do think too, as leaders, I forget this sometimes. And Katie and I talk about verbal discipline. Is like our words mean a lot to people.
Hmm.
absolutely.
And so when you do like those things, like I know I've felt it too. When a leader says something, you're like, and you will hold on to that. Like you might, it was like, I'm like, I
Hmm.
might forgive, but I'm not forgetting. And I'm going to your point, I'm going to like use that as like a key moment. And so I try to think about, and we've gotten way better with the podcast because we have to, because we're live and out front, but that people do. I mean, because people quote us sometimes, and I'm like, did I say that? And but if, especially if it's something negative,
Mm,
it really can sit with people. And I have to remind myself, like, just because it's true doesn't mean it needs to be said all the time. And
yes.
Yeah,
it is
exactly.
hard because you feel like you brought meeting and you ask the question and I'm gonna give you the answer. And it's like sometimes it's okay to be quiet and, and just, but it's hard. I do think as leaders we feel like our role is to have an opinion on a lot of things.
Exactly.
And sometimes maybe it's best for others to chime in as well. Okay, last question. I love this one. Sometimes, so I think people think Katie and I do like so much prep, and then I'm like, oh, this is a nice question. Like, so of all the big moments in your career, can you talk about like a small, maybe even quirky habit or ritual that you've developed that you feel like has significantly contributed to your effectiveness as a leader?
Sure. So I'd say probably in the last 8 or 10 years, when I wake up, I spend more time praying to cover
Mm.
my day, because honestly, some days are like by Monday, I'm done. You may just like, oh my gosh, and I still have the rest of the week to go. And I would say without God, without praying, I don't think I'd be able to do it, honestly. There have been some really tough moments where, as I said, you didn't think that you would get through, but that time in the morning centers me to be peaceful. I know that there are people at the office or, virtual environment who aren't your enemies, but sometimes when things are happening, you're just like, ugh. And so, to have peace and grace and think like, for me, that's been, I would say, my secret.
Oh, I love that one.
I do too.
Like,
There's something about starting your day that way.
yeah, Katie and I love meditation and
Yeah,
prayer in the
I do
morning.
meditation.
Uh, mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Priscilla. This was so
Thank you, guys.
interesting. Now
I
I'm like
loved
gonna
it.
Google and research. Like that book sounds so interesting. And the Bisco, I'm like this. Like to your point, learning is yeah. I learned something new today. It's been such a pleasure to meet you.
Definitely. Thank you
So
so much.
wonderful. Thank you for joining.